day to you. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Hamer, and I'm a Public Safety Executive Advisor for Power DMS. Before we jump into the topic, and more importantly, what we as leaders, both formal and informal, can do about it, I want you to know a little bit about me. I had an amazing 25-plus year career in Illinois law enforcement, beginning in 1998 and ending early 2026. The last 3 years of that career, I was chief. For the past 10 years, I've also been the accreditation director for the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. I earned a master's degree in organizational leadership. I'm an avid student of leadership, organizational culture, and processes. This is what we'll cover today: describing why officers leave, identify what they're leaving, and discuss solutions to improve the environment. Some realities we're facing. If you've gotten to this point, these symptoms are not a shock to you. Recruitment and retention are difficult symptoms of the policing landscape. A quick review of IACP literature, Police One articles, and labor statistics unmask what we've all known. There's a labor shortage in policing, and it's getting worse. Less people are getting into policing and service industries due to fewer in the labor pool, but it's still a worthy profession, and the generation coming up wants to make a difference in their communities. The labor force data isn't the whole problem, obviously. Realizing recruitment and retention are interconnected, not only with each other, but with an overall environmental approach is worth pursuing. And we'll get into that in a moment. Police leadership should not be glossed over here. Senior and even mid-level leadership has a hand in cultivating an environment worthy of staying. But the effect of positive police leadership is highest once the officer is on the department. What does command staff need to know? We need to know why officers are leaving. A quick scan of articles and research suggests that stress, burnout, toxic culture, lack of support from the public and within the agency, and low morale are all prevalent reasons for officers leaving. Some officers leave the entire field of policing and public safety for maybe the grass is greener. Other officers are leveling up to other agencies. Greater pay, better culture, more supports, or at least the perception of such. Leveling up implies that the officer is still committed to public safety, but for how long? Thinking of your own agency, why have people left? Where did they go? More research is needed in this area. What makes our workers stay? Think of a supervisor or a peer that you'd go to the ends of the world for, to impress, to please, to back up, or to stand by. I'm sure we all have that type of person, or we should. Maybe we're that type of person for someone else. What if we can craft the agency, the leaders, the work processes, to be equal to a place worthy of generating that commitment? Can we make the work environment committed to you and your officers as much as you were committed to that person that you'd go through thick and thin for? As leaders, what can we do within the agency, the culture, and the processes to ensure that officers enjoy a healthy 20, 25, 30-year career with us? And that's what we're going to dive into today. A lot of officers aren't just leaving agencies, they're leaving environments. There's characteristics and traits that are driving them out. Some of us may be in positions to improve pay and benefits. And pay is important as it provides a method to sustain and provide for the worker and their family. Typically in public service, pay is negotiated at fixed points in time. We have to do more between those fixed points to encourage and recognize our public safety professionals. Imagine a supportive, morale-forward environment investing in the officer's daily experiences. Let's examine improvements we can make here. Every job, every career has natural ebbs and flows of engagement. If you're in public safety, I'll ask this question. Have you ever felt burnout? Have you ever felt that state of physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion caused by chronic and unmanaged workplace stress? If you have, how did you come out of it? Or did you come out of it? I remember a bar fight early in my career. It was a 6-on-1 bar fight out in front of a crowded sidewalk. I had run up, I heard crunching, I thought it was bones breaking. Turns out it was plastic cups being stepped on the sidewalk, but somebody was definitely getting a beat down. I had used pepper spray. I effected arrest of one attacker. A hostile crowd had popped up and surrounded me. I called for emergency backup. Bottles were being thrown. The crowd was surging. A couple of resisting arrests were made by arriving backup units. All this was complicated by the fact that one of those arrests was a patrol lieutenant's drunken teenage son. It was one of the hundreds of times I felt impending danger during my career, but it was the first time I felt thrust into the unknown. Sure, I had signed a policy at hiring time, but I didn't know the actual use of force investigative process. Certainly, I didn't want to be any part of citing a lieutenant's son. But there are healthy ways to address stress and burnout. A method of peer support, having a supervisor check in after that stressful call, or even some sort of a touch base, but even the less than normal calls. I had policed in a college town. Bar fights were nothing abnormal. But for me, it was abnormal because it was the first time I had been placed in danger, and it was the first time I didn't know what was going to happen. It wasn't until years later that I became chief that I adopted this mantra with command staff. When something is abnormal, we have to increase communication. That's probably the clunkiest mantra known to man. But the point is this: when things are not normal, or even when there's a critical situation, we have to increase our communication. Early warning signs are often visible. Check these out: declining engagement, missed acknowledgments, reduced training participation, increased skepticism or silence. Be on the lookout for these symptoms. If you're noticing these, it's likely that you're behind the curve already. What are some other ones? Think of your own agencies and experiences. What else have you noticed? A disheartening fact is that once we notice one or more of these, it could be too late for some officers, but we need to double down, catch up, correct, and adjust for what's creating this symptomatic environment. Oftentimes, we're too late to save great employees from leaving. I suggest management has to do these things before we start seeing these traits manifest themselves. As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What's magical about this approach is doing so is leadership in action. Hundreds of books have been written about the difference between managers and leaders. We can manage a retention problem, or we can lead our peers to a better environment. How does that environment look? Let's take a peek. Who has experienced the following? Do more with less, training moving in-house to cut expenses, unfunded training mandates. The insight here is that completion does not equal comprehension. Merely signing off on a policy doesn't mean the employee has read or understands it. Reinforcement of the knowledge in our policy and critical content builds confidence. Confidence reduces stress and hesitation. Effective strategies like reinforcing the policy content regularly builds that trust in their decision-making process. And tracking understanding is not just the completion. Clear, accessible policies reduce stress, hesitation, inconsistency. Coupled with check-ins or increased communication during these critical calls or abnormal times is going to help a leader lead through that problem. Leaders need visibility into policy access, critical content updates and access, and not only acknowledgement, but knowing that the officers know the material. Consistency is better than perfect communication. A good plan executed at the right time is better than a perfect plan a day late. Establishing lines of communication can be difficult at first. A consistent cadence of conversational opportunities paired with active listening will foster trust. Communicating the agency's direction, goals, and senior leadership's intention, along with advice, at roll calls and briefings and other internal avenues is paramount. For further proof of the formidable power of communicating, look to any leadership book. A culture won't be changed through one email or one roll call or one shift visit, but consistent communication opportunities, the message gets delivered and then supported, and then it becomes part of your culture. Inconsistency in messaging, actions, or expectations grinds at morale. It's often said officers manage their own morale. And if you believe that, then you have to at least control the factors that you can do to stop grinding down their efforts. A fair training program would be one that measures trainees against clearly established set of guidelines and criteria. Trust driven by fairness of process, not the outcomes. It's not whether the arrest was made, but did it follow the due process, the tangible training guidelines that we use for trainees when they're on FTO. All too often, we see agencies that have a process in place for, let's say, onboarding or FTO, but then afterwards, there's little to no documented growth, assignment tracks, or motivation, unless it's intrinsic to the officer, to achieve or do better. Developing skills equals growth. Now that we've seen, or will be on the lookout for these check engine lights, we can get to solutions. People need clarity within their roles. Policy clarity and having critical content at workers' fingertips provides that properly loaded hard drive for our employees. Consistency is an experience you cultivate and spread evenly within the organization. Visibility, the recognizing the good work within the agency, ties visibility into consistency. Let's anchor these to our core fundamentals or service. Many leaders are highlighting empathy, community engagement, and other values they hold in high regard. Accountability. Leaders and managers have to follow through with systems that improve culture. All these traits together afford us our best shot at improving retention across our chosen profession. Leadership question for you moving forward is this: where is friction showing up for your officers? Officers make an infinite amount of decisions. Let's be sure they're equipped to access their knowledge database when they need it. We need to communicate clear expectations and seek to make sure they understand those expectations. And check your systems. Ask, can these be better? Let's look at systems before the check engine light comes on. Can you see those gaps? Ask for clarification. Ask the question of your mid-level and first-line supervisors. Those are your point people. And take earnestly what they say to heart and see what changes can be made. At this time, you can send in your questions and we'll answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Jeff. I am Kristen Baskett. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at NeoGov, and I have the pleasure of leading us through the Q&A session today. If you're out there in the audience, there's still time to put your questions in the chat. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. If we don't get to your question today, we will be following up via email. So with that, I have a good number already. So Jeff, the first question that I have is actually around burnout. What are some early signs that officer burnout is building, and how can leaders catch it sooner?
That's an excellent question. Burnout is going to be like different for everybody, but there's some commonalities here. Sometimes officers talk about it, but not to the right people. So you might see some car to cars with other officers, during business checks or whatever. Um, getting a pulse on what's being talked about. Are people overworked, or what are they expressing? Um, and so if the sergeant or that officer is sharing that with the appropriate people, then we can take steps to intervene in that burnout. Um, Call offs, sick time abuse, and maybe not sick abuse, but like, oh, I have a headache, I really can't come in today. Like, is the headache the symptom of the larger burnout scenario? So sometimes monitoring sick time and not to be punitive, but to find out what's the root of the problem. Because remember, we want everybody to have that 20, 30-year arc of a career. And if they're in a natural ebb and flow of just like, I'm not 100% today, I'm not going to be 100% engaged, but I'm like a good 90, Okay, we can probably live with that. But if we're in our like 10, 20 or negative where like I just can't come in, I can't do this, we need to have the wellness initiatives in place and the culture to, have something said so that we can intervene with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question is around policy and clarity around policy. So, how does policy clarity actually impact officers in the field?
Another excellent question. So policies, laws, court decisions, they make up the football field that we play on. And I use this example when I was an FTO all the way up to chief. That's our football field. We're allowed to run plays on that football field. So knowing the rules of the game is paramount so that we're not penalized or we're not, going backwards in negative yardage. Um, so policy clarity gives officers that playbook. And so when they are faced with an arrest situation, a custody situation, something Fourth Amendment where they're seizing somebody's liberty, we want them to be correct. We want them to be on that football field. And so, policy clarity, training clarity and what they're trained on loads that hard drive so that they're going to make a more accurate decision. And we know in public safety, like every day is different, every call is different when we look at the details, but there's some broader things that overlap. Like this is a arrest situation, this is a warrant situation. So we kind of know where we're at on that football field, but we want to be clear. And that's where I think, policy clarity comes into play. Being able to recall that policy, either when we have discretionary time to like look that up on our MDT, on our mobile device when we're at a scene. Um, I can't tell you the amount of times when I was chief on my way to a critical call that I got some quick advice from my policy, like, oh, establish communication. Like I'm going to a critical incident and I'm thinking like, okay, what I need to have a press conference at some point. That's so much further down the line. We need to like secure our perimeter. We need to do this. And so checking on that doesn't make us weak or ineffective. That makes us more accurate and that makes us more likely to be successful down the road.
All right. Next one is around retention strategy. This was a great question. What is the biggest mistake that agencies make when they're trying to improve retention?
Wow. That's deep. So the biggest mistake that I think that we see around retention is the biggest mistake I've seen is chalking it up to this is a generational thing. And let me explain that. The generational concept was that old dog policing was that you took these problems, you pushed them down, you didn't talk about it, um, and then subject yourself to like divorce and all sorts of other issues because we're not sharing um, and managing the stress or burnout. So I would say, the new generation coming up has seen that prior generation just sort of exhaust themselves like a fuse. Um, and so I think, you know, the biggest improvement we can make is lose that generational insight that you're like, no, just keep this to ourselves. We're supposed to get through it. Just, carry on and don't say anything. I think the new generation is correct. I think we should say, this is bothering me. I'm experiencing burnout, or I'm thinking of leaving. Sarge, I'm thinking of leaving. There's some things I don't like here. And then for the sergeant or that other informal leader to be open and say, what can we do to improve? For a chief to say, a lieutenant, anybody in the command structure, what can we do to improve? What can we do to make things better here? So, yeah, I guess that's a twofold answer, generational and communication.
Excellent. All right. So, sort of in the same vein, the next question is how can leaders move from viewing support as a cultural concept to something that is consistently delivered through systems and processes? So, maybe generational and cultural in the same vein.
Sure. Yeah. So I think systems are best, or let me say it like this, systems are most effective when they're part of the culture, the fabric of the agency or the department, right? So like Usually, when systems are modified or new systems are laid out, there's this saying that cops hate change, but they also hate the way things are. So the faster admin can like swallow that, hey, look, there's going to be a little bit of a change, there's going to be an improvement here, but this is why, and then kind of lay out the reasons why. And we have to remain consistent as leaders and get behind those changes, those improvements, and weave that as part of the culture. Um, so much has been written about organizational culture. It's not just a mission statement on the wall. It's not just something about community development on the back of a business card. It's earnestly looking and it's earnestly making those connections and engaging with our citizenry, right? So like having feedback from our peers, from citizens, departments that are embracing that level of engagement. Um, I don't know the data off the top of my head whether they're experiencing less retention or recruitment woes, but I would assume that a department that's getting cascaded with comments about how great the officer, Officer Jones helped me with this, and I can't believe I was helped with this, they changed my tire. That is a morale forward type of leadership, and so I think making it part of the culture and not just like this is a chief program that we need to do, like this is for us, and so that we get that 30-year arc. And
Excellent, excellent. So, what roles does visibility into officer activity and engagement play in helping leaders make better retention decisions?
so a lot of us make decisions based on like metrics or logic, right? Where are we going to, we're entrusted with the public's money. How are we best going to use the public's money to move that needle for the officers, right? So I think getting that visibility, what we mean by visibility is like metrics, reports, analytics into officer behavior. Um, when it comes to policy acknowledgement, I started in a time where it was like, here, sign these. You had a whole week to do it, and everybody was done in 2 hours. And I was signing a lot of policy, not a lot of understanding. Um, there's solutions out there that we can track. How much time was spent on the policy. We can test for recall to see if they even understand the policy, and then reports based on that. So like we can actually determine what level of knowledge officers are at, if they're having trouble with certain policies, or if they have trouble with all the policies. And then it's like, wait, does this officer really have trouble with all the policies, or is this a marker of that disengagement? Is this an officer that's unwilling to acknowledge policy and take a couple test questions on it? That could be a sign of a bigger type of a problem, one that could be leading towards, disengaged, quiet quitting, safety issues, and the like.
So the next question I had is similar to the previous one. What breaks down between policy updates and real world execution, and how can agencies help close that gap?
Sure, that's a great question. So, in my experience, specifically with accreditation, when there comes a lot of policy changes in a short amount of time, what we have is almost the officers like versions in their head. What policy are they operating from, right? So like if we have policy A that says 1, 2, and 3, but because we're moving to accreditation or there's been a legal update, that policy changes to incorporate 5, 6, and 7. In our officers' heads, what version are they on? Are they on the one that goes up to 3 or the one that goes up to 7? So technology helps us because we can train and only provide the correct version that we want them to make decisions from. So in the real world, when I was an FTO, we would do driving quizzes. We would ask questions back and forth, FTO to rookie. Um, Roll call training. We would do, policy of the day, and sometimes that was just reading from the policy. Um, Sometimes that got a little heavy-handed
Mhm.
in a way because we're reading an 8-page use of force policy for 2 lines of edits, right? And it was somewhat effective. I think over time it lacks effectiveness. I mean, the continuity and the cadence is there, which is good, but the delivery is not one that's keen on adult learners or somebody in our profession. So I don't see technology as a crutch, but as more of a like a force multiplier. The technology can bring that policy question, that policy edit right to their fingertips. It can bring it to their patrol car. It can bring it to roll call where we can flash it up on a TV or a monitor and say, here's the new edit. We've got 2 lines in the use of force policy. Let's ask questions of the sergeant. Hey, how does this apply when I'm coming up on a fight in front of a bar and I'm outnumbered 6-1? How does this apply in this situation? Because what we want to do is we want the officer make the correct decision, which is always be safe and then, make sure everything's legally good, but then execute that with the care for everybody involved. That's a tall order. And so, um, what I would do as a leader or chief, let's make sure we're giving that specific technology the gravity that it needs to what we want them to address.
Excellent. I feel like you were reading my mind here a little bit because the next question touches on a lot of this, which is what does a continuous training model look like in practice? And how does it change officer readiness over time? So perhaps let's focus on the second half of that question. When it's done well, how does good training change officer readiness over time?
Sure. So I mean, to go back to my football field analogy, if we're a football team, we know when the Super Bowl is scheduled, and if we're a football team, we work all year to get to that Super Bowl, right? No football team is going to make it to the Super Bowl if they just say, okay, well, let's practice the one time because we know the Super Bowl is on a Sunday in February. They're not going to make it. So what I feel in policing when we're called to the Super Bowl, whether that's at a pursuit that jumps off in front of us, felony traffic stop, something critical, a use of force, um, we don't have time to start practicing. Like we're at the Super Bowl, so we need to do everything ahead of time. So what I like is, I think indicators of good training is like a cadence, regular practice, um, make it timely, so that it's at a smart time during the shift. Usually roll call at the beginning of your shift is a great time to go over that. At the end of our 12-hour shift is probably not the greatest time to go over, recalling what our use of force is like. But that's not to say that you can't do it because we don't know when the felony traffic stop is going to jump off. We don't know when the pursuit's going to happen. We don't know when we're going to be involved in a use of force. So I think it's important to, mirror what we do as best we can. It is, policy refresher and policy training. But when we are good at it, the officers can make more confident decisions. And a confident decision um, that's correct is likely going to be without hesitation, likely to control that person more quickly, likely to keep that person under control as more safely or placing them at less risk of receiving more and greater force that could be unreasonable. Um, so yeah, I think those would be the characteristics.
All right. I think that is all the time that we have for today. Again, if we didn't get to your questions, we will be following up via email and you will get the recording of this presentation as well. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank you, Jeff. Thanks for all of the insight that you've shared with us today. I know I learned a lot, and our audience has as well. So
Thank you,
thanks,
Kristen.
everyone.